Alrighty. I guess we'll go ahead and get
Okay,
started.
we'll
Yeah,
get ready. Greetings, hola, howdy, bienvenido, buenos dias, ni hao, shalom, salam. We are Jeff.
And Sandra,
Collectively, we are the Mobile
mobile retiree.
Retiree. We retired, sort of, but that's too long a story for today in 2023 and set out to travel the world. If you want to know why we travel full time and how we got started, we do share that info on our website at themobileretiree.com. You're also welcome to ask us any questions when we get to the Q&A session at the end.
And just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this, so if all goes well, we'll post this info or we'll email this replay out to everybody who attends.
So it's been a full year. We've visited 9 countries, including 2 months spent in the US, so 8 foreign countries: Panama, Costa Rica, Portugal, Spain, France, England, Canada, Argentina, staying for more than a month in 6 of those countries. Spain and France we'll have to get back to later.
We're going to share with you what we budgeted, what it cost us to live as full-time international travelers, not what it costs just to travel, but everything we spent, including expenses that we would have had even if we'd stayed back home in Oregon.
So we'll start with a caveat. When we use the word budget, what we really mean is target. We were making semi-educated guesses about what it would cost to live in a random selection of foreign countries. Our original goal was to see if we could travel full-time internationally and get change back from $40,000 per year. Further, could we do that while spending a significant amount of our time in Europe? The short answer is essentially yeah, but.
Spoiler alert, we didn't, but we learned some very valuable lessons and we'll figure we'll do better this coming year.
So we'll share how we arrived at our target number for each category, where we went over, and most importantly, why we went over. The categories we use for tracking, and these one way or another account for every dollar we spend, are accommodations, relocation expenses, local travel and activities expense, food, and that's food out and food purchased in the grocery store, health insurance and healthcare, technology, clothing and miscellaneous, and then non-travel related stuff. So we'll break it all down. We'll get a little bit granular on each of those categories. What were the major impacts to the numbers? And can we or will we do anything differently in future to get those numbers down?
And then at the end, we'll give you a chance or we'll give you the grand total. Or if you do the math, you'll be able to figure it out by the time we get there. And then we'll also share some of the lessons we learned and give you a chance to ask your questions, whether it's budget related or if it's just about our first year as nomads. I'm sure it'll come as no surprise that our 3 biggest expenses was food, lodging, and travel. And those 3 categories were probably 70% of our expenses.
So first, accommodation. We use mostly short-term rentals like Airbnb and Booking.com for our long stays. We stay in hotels as little as possible, usually just if we have a 2 or 3 night stopover. Kitchen facilities are important to us as we don't like to spend money on restaurants. We usually book on the outskirts of town if we have to use hotels. For example, the last few nights in England were spent in London. We stayed near Heathrow, kind of outskirts of the city, and used the bus and train to get into the city each day. Because our room was outside of London's touristy areas, we paid $480 for 3 nights rather than the $300 per night it would have been in London, and it was a nicer, larger room. But this also meant that we spent about $35 a day on transport back and forth to the city and a little over an hour each way, but the overall savings was well worth it to us. In Paris, we stayed north of the river for $98 a night. We could have easily taken the metro into the city for a few bucks. We actually spent our time exploring Saint-Denis and Saint-Ouen instead. The rookie mistake that I made when I did our initial plan for the budget, I used Idealista and Flat.io to get an idea of housing costs. And they indicated that 1-bedroom apartments are available in a lot of the cities we plan to visit for $500 or $600 a month. What I didn't factor in was that short-term rentals cost 2 to 3 times as much as long-term rentals. So my initial poorly researched budget for accommodation was $8,400 for the year. What did we actually spend? A little less than 12,000. Now that number could have been better, but we ran into a situation in England that necessitated a 29-night rental we hadn't counted on. And in Panama, our first day, we swapped places at the last minute. What was originally a $1,000 expense became a $1,300 expense, but totally worth it to have a 25th floor ocean view condo for the month instead of a ground level street view apartment. We reduced our housing costs a little bit with pet sits. For example, we spent almost 2 months in Oregon, and aside from our first week back in the US, we had no housing costs there. We had back-to-back pet sits from August 24th to October 14th, except for one night. On the other hand, without the pet sits, we wouldn't have had as many many higher priced short stays due to scheduling constraints. Pet and house sitting is becoming a little problematic, so that's a topic for a whole different video.
The next expense is our relocation travel, and that is expenses to get from point A to point B. Includes airfare, trains, buses, between locations, that sort of thing. This also includes travel insurance versus medical insurance, but travel insurance, because travel insurance is about canceled flights, lost luggage, that sort of thing. It also covers transport between apartments, like next week's expense to move from our current location to another apartment here in Buenos Aires. The Uber ride for that will go into this category as well. This is an area of budget where we went way over, but at least we did it with some intentions. The excess was pretty much all spent on stuff that we decided we would spend for comfort and convenience. We could have managed the same moves and stayed on budget, but we wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. For example, our first flight from Oregon to Panama, there was a last minute offer to bump up into first class for the Portland to Miami leg. And so we spent a few $100s for that. Flying from Costa Rica to Portugal, London to Winnipeg, Manitoba to Washington State. And then from Oregon down here to Argentina, we paid for seat and seat selection and upgrade fees every time. He's 6'2", and so with the long legs, standard economy isn't acceptable for any flights over about 2 hours, where he spends the day with the knees up around his neck. So sometimes it was about the experience and comfort. When it was time to move from Portugal to England, we had the option to take a series of 42-hour series of overnight buses plus a ferry for about $300, or we could have flown for about $350, including the extra leg room and check bag, which we've since done away with. We don't do check bags anymore. We chose instead to take accommodations of a bus, high-speed train, and ferry for the experience. If you've ever done the English Channel in a ferry, it's actually kind of cool. We stopped for a few nights in Barcelona, a few nights in Paris, and then a few nights in Cannes before crossing via ferry over to Portsmouth. This combination of transportation methods costing us closer to $800, as well as the increase in accommodation and food expenses. We discussed the expense and decided to go with it. The budget for relocation travel was $7,200 a year, and we spent about $10,800.
Next category is local travel and activities expenses. So this includes Uber and Bolt rides, taxis, buses, trams, and trains to get around wherever we're at, and all the touristy and sightseeing things, admission and entrance fees to museums, etc., like our guided tour of La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, our train ride from Faro to Tavira in the Algarve. Now, there's a bit of a misconception here sometimes. We're somewhere between tourist and expat. Yes, we do some sightseeing, but most of the time we're just living our lives as we would back in Oregon. Our budget for local travel and activities expenses was $400 per month, or $4,800 for the year. We came in at $3,750 for the year, averaging just over $300 per month. And this category can be pretty volatile. One month we spent nearly 600, while another month we spent zero. The biggest splurges, the Harry Potter studio tour and La Sagrada Familia guided tour. No regrets on either. Totally worth the extra expense.
Totally. So the next category was food. We broke this down into two, or we track it into two separate subcategories. One is for food out, and the other one is for groceries. We don't eat out in restaurants as much as people think we would, and it's just about the same as we would have if we'd been back home in Oregon. We spent probably more than some travelers, less than others. Budget assumptions were totally guesswork here, based on the idea that we'd want to eat out sometimes, but that it would cost less than the US. We plugged in $450 a month as a placeholder, so $5,400 for the year. We ended up at about $6,350, primarily because we ended up staying in a couple of places where we didn't have kitchen facilities, and we ate on the ferry and a couple of the airports.
Not cost effective.
Not cost effective. We had 145 meals out from November 15th, 2023, when we left the States, to August 12th, 2024, when we returned to the States. And then August 13th to August 15th, we had 30 meals.
October 15th.
I'm sorry, October 15th. We had 30 meals out that we paid for, but some of those included guests, so the math is kind of whack. Groceries. We're pretty flexible in this category in order to simplify the tracking. Some folks have a separate line item for household goods, personal care products like shampoo, razors, that sort of thing. We lump it all together. Basically, if it's stuff we bought in the grocery store, it's in this category. Lunch meat and sandwiches, sandwich bread, things like that shares equal space with paper towels, bath soaps, etc. Our original budget was $450 per month. Again, $5,400 for the year. Final total that we spent was $5,200. The total target number for all the food out and groceries was $10,800 for the year, and we went over by about $1,000. All of it in the food out category.
Next up, health insurance and healthcare. This includes our international health insurance, our US healthcare coverage, and also prescription refills and any drugstore purchases. We bought our international health insurance through IMG for $2,411, which if you average out, it's $201 per month. Additionally, we maintained our ACA plan at $81 per month because we knew we'd be spending a month or two in the US. I have a pre-existing condition that requires an annual visit to the cardiologist. We're rethinking the US healthcare coverage because by the time you add up the monthly premiums and the deductible for the one visit I had, we spent $1,200 in exchange for a single $300 office visit. On the other hand, US healthcare coverage would cover any catastrophic events if my implanted cardioversion device went haywire while we were stateside. I really hate insurance generally because you want to not use the benefit, but then it feels like wasted money, which first world problems, I suppose. This category also includes prescription refills, which are way cheaper in Europe than North America. We spent more for a 28-day supply of 2 medications in Canada than we spent the entire 5 months in Europe, and it's not even close. Not even close. Refills on a couple of 90-day prescriptions in the US and the insurance copay was more than I would have paid in Portugal to just walk in and buy the meds. So this category was budgeted at $3,960 for the year, $335 per month. The final total was $4,050.
Then we have our technology expenses. This includes our blog expenses like website hosting, domain name, a Google Workspace account, and programs that we use for image and video editing, as well as our cell phone coverage and data plans. For cell phones, we had switched to Mint Mobile pre-departure because our only real requirement for the service was that we could keep our phone numbers, which we had had for about 20 years. Our Mint Mobile plans are super cheap. Each of us have a 5 gigabyte data and unlimited talk and text plan that works in the States for $180 for the year. And yeah, you heard that right. If you're interested, we do have a referral code for you, but it is $180 for the year. We also have unlocked phones, and so we bought Airlo. I think I'm saying that right. Airlo eSIMs for international data, and we use Wi-Fi wherever we can get it. I used my data plan way faster than he did because I usually handle all of the navigation when we're out wandering around strange cities. We each bought the 20 gigabyte 365-day plan from Airlo for $70, and that's for the year. I depleted my 20 gigabyte in late June, so I had to top up. Jeff ran out of his 365 days with just a smidge data.
2 gigabytes left.
Yeah, 2 gigabytes.
Had to renew today.
Yeah. So we had guesstimated $100 a month for technology, so $1,200 for the year. We ended up ended up spending about $2,100, sort of. We're prepaid for part of next year. Jeff's phone service is paid through September 2025. And I have enough data on my plan to probably get through April, so our technology costs for year 2 will be a little bit lower.
The surprise category, clothing and miscellaneous, is kind of a catch-all, but not really much fell into miscellaneous. Includes clothing, cigarettes, monthly subscription to Ancestry.com, because we're also researching our family history while we travel, and the occasional item that just doesn't fit other categories, like we needed a new kitchen hand towel and had to buy a spatula. A good chunk of that money was refit costs while we were in Oregon. I needed a new pair of trousers. It was time to replace socks and briefs, replace my puffy coat with a windbreaker/raincoat. Sandra had some clothing and miscellaneous expenses as well. The budget was $45 per month because we had no idea. The total expense for the year for that category was just over $1,700. So not appearing in this film, the final category, if you will, aside from the expenses of traveling full time, other stuff also happens in our lives. So we would have had these expenses regardless whether we were traveling or not. Life insurance policies, we had an E&O policy for our real estate business, which we just let go after 8 months after we dissolved the LLC. We had to pay insurance for the pickup that we left behind with our son, disability insurance, all that sort of thing came up to $3,900 for the year against a budget target of $2,700. And the E&O insurance accounts for the overage. I hadn't accounted for that.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, when we started developing our plan, the idea was to see, can we do this for under 40,000 without making too many sacrifices? For instance, we don't do shared bathrooms with strangers, and we have very little interest in renting a bedroom in somebody's house. We did that once. Got lucky, I guess.
Yeah.
But not a fan. We like our own space, not least of all because we spend a fair amount of our time at home. We're homebodies, wherever that happens to be at the moment. This isn't a vacation for us, so we're not out doing things every day.
So in the planning, and as we've done this, we've watched a lot of budget videos and read plenty of blog posts from other nomads. The number that comes up most often for this lifestyle is $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year. There's definitely people doing it for less, but they make some compromises, cutting back on activities and scrimping on transportation. For example, faced with the choice between a $300 4-hour train ride or a $65 11-hour overnight bus, we're on the train, they're on the bus. They eat in restaurants twice a month, we're closer to 12 or 15. These little choices add up, so it depends how you want to travel and how you choose to spend your money. Another thing to be mindful of when watching traveler budget videos is what's actually being accounted for. We saw one that had impressively low numbers, but then they casually mentioned owning a home in one of the countries where they spent 3 months. So yeah, if you own a property in your destination, it'll definitely bring down your monthly costs. Most of the things that we splurge on are small upgrades, but over time they add up. We made 5 major moves and basically spent an extra $500 each time. Suddenly that's $2,500 over budget. So the final total for our first year as senior nomads was, drum roll please, $50,700. So measured against our original target of $39,600, that's a lot. Measured against what it would have cost us to just live in one place in Oregon, it's actually not that much. It averages out to $4,225 per month, excluding transportation costs. So the total for our living expense was $39,864, just over $3,300 a month. So what have we learned?
Well, we learned a lot of things. We did learn that we underestimated how much we were willing to pay for comfort and convenience. And this preference shows up in our accommodation and relocation expenses. We also learned that we need to stick with longer stays, ideally a month or more, and avoid the costly 2 or 3 5-night stays if we want to stay on budget. We also learned that staying in Airbnbs for longer stays often means incurring extra household goods expense. Many Airbnbs are stocked up with the basics and usually only a 2-day supply of things like toilet paper, paper towels, etc. This means that we ended up wasting some money on items that we couldn't consume in the month, but didn't want to carry with us. For example, trash bags often come in boxes of 25, and we'll use maybe 4 or 5 of them in the month. We do carry-on only, so there is literally no room in the backpack or the suitcase. And every Airbnb seems to have a different size trash bag anyway.
Right? No standardization.
Yep.
We modified some eating habits to reduce waste as well. We both enjoy a bit of Dijon mustard on a sandwich, but we can't buy just a bit. You buy a 4 or 5 ounce jar, which for us is enough for several months. Since we're only in a place for 30 days, we'll barely use it. Taking it with us isn't practical, so we just skip it. Now, we did splurge and spend $11 on a jar of hoisin sauce versus the $5.79 it probably would have cost in Oregon, but we'll definitely consume all of that during the 2 months we're here in Buenos Aires. Finally, most importantly, we learned the importance of asking clarifying questions and have learned to communicate much more effectively. So, thanks for sticking with us. Now, we'll throw it open for questions.